Hello, my name is Osha. I like to talk about American presidents and I discuss, US history and also laws. However, this is not a platform for legal advice. And so while I hold a Juris Doctor degree, I'm not licensed to practice law in the state of Maryland or whatever state you're in. But in any event, this is all for educational purposes, and today what I want to do is discuss, uh, the arbitrary use of medication on defendants and violating their 14th Amendment and zone of privacy rights, and also protections in the First Amendment, which gives us the right of autonomy to protect our autonomy, and to be self-governing, right? The rights to our thoughts, our speech, our opinions, thoughts, and beliefs. So, my motivation for discussing this is something I saw in the news about um, a judge in Tampa, Florida. Um, Her name's Lisa Allen, Judge Lisa Allen, a Hillsborough County judge. And the news article stated that she had recently been reassigned by the chief judge, Christopher Sabella, because she was apparently stopping defendants from using psychiatric medication, right? And she was very critical of the use of antipsychotics, and she expressly barred defendants from using antipsychotics in her court, saying she would only allow defendants to use medication if uh, it's for pain, it's for physical ailments, but anything that affected the brain, as she put it, she wasn't going to allow it. She didn't want any Ambien, any Valium, anything to deal with bipolar. As she put it, bipolar crap, because she said it was like taking cocaine. It was like taking narcotics, and that it made things worse, right, for the defendants. That and it made them feel loopy. I guess it made them feel like zombies. She didn't say zombies, but what she expressed uh, was akin to it. Um, so when she expressed this, apparently a criminal defense lawyers association in Hillsborough County was, they were up in arms, clutching their pearls, of course, and they circulated notices saying that you know stopping the defendants from using medication subjected them to express hallucinations, made them psychotic, and might even make them prone to more criminal behavior. Um, and of course, uh, she was reassigned by the chief judge of Hillsborough County, Christopher Sabella. Now, I can't say I do not support the actions of Judge Lisa Allen. It was well informed, and it's courageous, and it shows a judge that has empathy and compassion for American defendants in her courtroom. And of course, remember that defendants are still innocent until proven guilty. There is a criminal conspiracy. There's a criminal collusion between the criminal justice system in many jurisdictions in America, particularly the state of Maryland, right? And the corrupt venal pharmaceuticals, right? The pharma industry, pharmaceuticals that make these drugs. I say so because of my experience, right? I'm somebody who has no history of mental illness. I don't have a mental illness. I'm a middle-aged man. I live a successful life, and I've already done videos, so I'm not going to go into. I don't want to digress and talk about my experience, but in any event, I was wrongfully charged with a crime in the state of Maryland in 2023. The but the focus of the prosecutor who wrongfully charged a crime, right, who committed prosecutorial misconduct, the focus was for them to offer me a plea bargain, right, and then her offer was that I should, take go and do volunteer to go and do a mental health evaluation and take treatment, and they would drop the charges. I said no, right? So when I said no, the judge then did a false incompetency to stand trial order, right? That's Judge James Bonifant. He abuses competency evaluations, right? So he forced me, used a court order, sent me to a psychiatric hospital to go and get treatment. Fortunately, because I don't have a mental illness, I have an aunt who's a psychiatrist. My aunt had already alerted the judge, my aunt who's a psychiatrist, that no, I don't have a mental illness. My family had already written the judge, and I gave it to my lawyer, sent the information to the judge that no, I do not have a mental illness. And so my family had already indicated that I wasn't to get any treatment from any hospital in America. My family hadn't seen me since 1999. I never left Nigeria with a mental illness or taking medication. You can't suddenly say at my middle age that because somebody accused me of a crime, then I should suddenly start taking medication. So I said no, and my family supported that. Okay, if I can go to trial, proceed to trial, if they don't dismiss the bogus charges, I'll proceed to trial, but no medication. And my family insisted that they must be present at any evaluation because I don't have to do any evaluation. That's state of Maryland laws. But in the state of Maryland, apparently, once they charge you with a crime, certain crimes, a judge can order arbitrarily and take away, violate your constitutional rights. Because in the state of Maryland and in America, in American courts today, especially in the South, the racist southern state courts that have all these racist laws that are really meant to target minorities, they have they've linked criminal conduct with a person's mental health, which is within his zone of privacy. And so they want to intrude into your zone of privacy rights because they've charged you with a crime. So they're assuming that you're guilty, right? Because again, you're protected by the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. A judge under the law cannot impose rehabilitation, which is what trying to force somebody to take treatment is. It can't impose rehabilitation or punishment without a conviction. So that's a violation of the Eighth Amendment rights that they're doing in southern states, right? They have a fig leaf that, well, the person probably had an undiagnosed disorder, and that's what made them commit this crime. But they haven't proved that they committed a crime. It's just a charge statement, and they start ab initio from the beginning. My charge statement by a police officer who's writing, suggests he has subnormal intelligence. That's Demarcus Coleman. This guy wrote that I had an undiagnosed thought disorder, something defamatory. He didn't know me. He had never met me, but he wrote in his charge statement, his falsified, perjured charge statement that I presented with an undiagnosed thought disorder. How did he know that? How did he know that I had not used drugs and it was the effects of drugs? How did he know any of this? The guy's not intelligent. He can't think that deeply. He can't analyze that well anyway, right? So in any event, the judge now took it from there, asked me to volunteer and go and do a mental health evaluation. And I said no. Fortunately, my public defender was now saying, look, I'm resisting based on principle, right? Because I'm saying he's violating my constitutional rights. A judge who never let me speak in court, he never talked with me. He was just talking at me, making false statements, claiming I had bipolar disorder. Well, his state psychiatrists have now told him, right? Because he sent me to two different psychiatric hospitals. Both of them, their doctors told them, no, I don't have a mental illness. No, I don't have bipolar disorder. So I was lucky, right? Because I'm a Christian. I was lucky that one, my mother was insistent. My mother was insistent that she has to talk to the hospitals. She talked with them. My mother went to court, right? Went to court, took my medical records, did got an affidavit, sent it to the courts in America. I was lucky I had those things. Many people in America don't have the fortune. I met a Nigerian student who had been arrested for weed when he was 18. He was in college, and he didn't want his parents to know. And he said he knew he didn't have a mental illness, but he said the public defender coerced him to take a plea bargain. And you see, the public defender's office, right? It's a free service provided for indigent people. I mean, hiring a lawyer is very expensive in America, right? It will break the bank. It will bankrupt you. So expect and now consider a student who was sent. His parents were in Nigeria. He came here alone for school for education. So his public defender coerced him to accept a plea bargain offer, telling him that look, they told him that they would convict him, lock him up, and then they deport him. He didn't want that. So they inveigled him that, well, if he accepts a plea bargain to say, well, he's not criminally liable by reason of a mental illness, which he said he didn't have, right? They would instead send him to a hospital, mental health hospital, psychiatric hospital to take treatment. They don't give you a terminal date, right? They don't give you a definite time when you're coming out. So you don't know. It's like unlike a sentence. If you go to trial and you're convicted, you know what your sentence is. It's clear, right? They tell you maybe it's 1 year, 2 years. So for the charges for weed, that then back then it was illegal. Today, what his offense is no longer criminal, but back then it was criminal. He wouldn't have done maybe 2 years, 1 year, 2 years, very, very little time, less than 1 year, right? It wasn't. I don't think it wasn't a felony offense, right? So he thought, well, that because he explained to me, he said he knew he didn't have a mental illness. He hadn't been diagnosed with a mental illness. So he said he expected the psychiatrist would be honest, that he would go and he'd be out tops 2 weeks. That was what he told me. That he would just, that they'd look at him and they'd see, well, there's nothing wrong with him. And they'd release him. And that would be the end. But the thing is, the catch 22 is that if you accept that not guilty by reason of not criminally responsible by reason of a mental illness, right? That's for the standard in the state of Maryland. You will not be released from the psychiatric hospital until the psychiatrist says you're well. That's a catch. You will not get out until the psychiatrist says you're well. Psychiatrists make money from saying you're not well. They don't get paid when they say you're well, right? They don't, because they make money from being paid for the medication they prescribe, right? And then there's something called iatrogenic effects. I've done videos talking about iatrogenic effects. I'll probably do one again for YouTube. That's You can find them on my Facebook page. Iatrogenic effects. That's like taking somebody. That's an illness that develops when you take someone who is well, but you put them in a hospital setting. There's some people who will just develop illnesses while they're under a hospital setting, right? They will develop an illness because of anxiety while being in a hospital setting, or a doctor may also misdiagnose you just because he assumes, well, that you've come to him in a hospital setting, there's got to be something wrong with you. And so they will misdiagnose you, and then they'll give you wrong medication, and they start to treat you for an illness you actually did not have in the first place. So those are iatrogenic effects. It's similar to the Pygmalion effects. That's Pygmalion effect. That's like a confirmation bias. Pygmalion, that refers to coined uh, um, per a Greek sculptor. Pygmalion was a Greek sculptor who made a very beautiful full sculpture of a beautiful woman. He fell in love with it, and Aphrodite breathed life into that sculptor. Right, Pygmalion was so in love with his creation that he came to life through the aid of Aphrodite. So that's where your creation comes to life. Something that's unreal comes to life. So that's similar to a Pygmalion effect or confirmation bias. So that's what happens when, because a state charges you with a crime that you're innocent until proven guilty, right? You still have your rights. There are rights that you're still supposed to have. The reason typically that a judge orders your detention is if you pose a flight risk, or if you pose a flight risk, or you're a danger to the community. But there are other rights that your constitutional rights are still supposed to be maintained, right? Now, in the state of Maryland and southern states, they're violating the zone of privacy rights, the mental health rights of patients, HIPAA rights. They're violating them uh, under the pretext that they've charged the defendant with a crime, somebody who's still supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. So, right on you, Judge Lisa Allen. I just totally support what she's doing, and she was wrongfully accused of stigmatizing the use of medication. No, what's stigmatizing is depriving a defendant of their rights to say no, because defendants are invariably coerced to take medication they don't want, which they often don't need. While I was wrongfully detained between 2024 and 2025, about 4 defendants died, right, by suicide in the jail I was in wrongfully, right? 4. 3 due to apparent drug overdose. 1, he jumped, he wrapped a towel around his neck and he jumped to his death. And that guy, his name was Dr. Trevor something. I'd written his name down. And he'd worked at the National Institutes for Health. Well, is it called of health? But NIH. Been a researcher, had a PhD, a white guy, jumped to his death, hanged himself with his not towel, with his blanket. And the media hides it. The media didn't report it because I was reading the papers. I was reading, it was not reported on TV. It was not reported in the news. So one of the good things, so I learned to get information, right? While I was wrongfully detained, there are many things that I learned. I learned how to dig up information, how to get information, source information from people, from correctional officers, from I learned how to gather information. I learned, so that was a good experience for me as well. It was a learning experience, right? I learned how to get information. I learned that. So they committed, they're committing crimes. It's not only unethical, but it's also criminal. What the criminal justice system, they're in bed with the pharmaceuticals and some of the state psychiatrists. They're committing fraud. In my case, I was fortunate that, well, the psychiatrists did the right thing. They told the judge that, no, this man, we couldn't prescribe any medication because he has no mental illness. We couldn't treat him because we couldn't see any mental illness. He has no mental illness. And that was that, and I was found competent to stand trial. Now, interestingly, though, a reason why I wanted to bring up Florida, in the state of Florida, which is different from Maryland's standard, right? In the state of Florida, a defendant can be found incompetent to stand trial. He can be sent to a psychiatric hospital if the judge thinks that person has a mental illness. So it's an arbitrary standard. I learned this because, when I was sent, excuse me, when I was sent to the behavioral health hospital, it's a nice, better way they call it now in America, behavioral health. It's really, really a psychiatric hospital. I was court ordered. So under a court order, that's the other thing you get. Under a court order, the hospitals can't treat you unless you act up, you do something. They can't, they just observe you. So a judge sends them and they're observing you, right? Unless you demonstrate that you need medication, you need treatment, you do something, maybe you're violent. If you're violent, so if they hit you, you should, sometimes I guess those things are staged. So I was assaulted, several times, and they charged those people. But the thing is, these are people who are already there. They have mental serious, they're psychotic. If all they're going to do is, they're just going to jab them, medicate them more, give them, increase their stay, increase their medication when they assault you. So when they assault you, it's probably staged. Don't respond. If you respond, then they're gonna force medicate you, right? There was a guy that I saw. He didn't have a mental illness. He was one. He was charged as well. He was a cool guy, black guy. He actually came from a wealthy family. But I learned something being arrested that in America it's such a it's such a it's a it's incarcerating its people. It has an industrial carceral system, right? And it's in the business of incarcerating its citizens, that anybody can just get into jail for the slightest reason. That was the first thing, the day I was locked up, that was the first thing the Sergeant Ajibade told me. The day when he saw and he locked me up, I don't know why he said that. He knew I'd never been locked up, and I was still stunned. That are you guys kidding me? You guys are actually locking me up, and I haven't done anything. This is crazy. And he came to me and he said, "You see, it is very easy to go to jail in this country." I don't know why he told me that, but that was what he said. That his name, he was a Nigerian guy, a sergeant at the jail, at the detention center, Sergeant Ajibade. He came to me, he said, "You see, it is very easy to go to jail in this country." And I'd been lucky. I'd been in America over 25 years. I'd never gone to jail, so, and I was stunned. So this guy at the psychiatric hospital, he was a black guy, and he was not ill. He was one of the guys. He was cool, right? He was cool, kept to himself, knew to be calm. But there was a guy there, and I knew he was a white guy who was a pleasant guy. But he had, and I learned about mental illnesses, the different types of mental illnesses. There are people who struggle, who, they need medication, right? They say they need medication. I don't speak for them. So this guy has something called impulsivity, right? He can't control himself. It's like a reflex. And he's thinking of something and he just hits out. He just punches out. And he done it to me, right? But I've been watching him, especially because he was pleasant. He'd see me, he'd smile, and he was a white guy, an older white guy, and he would want to talk to me, and he was very pleasant with me, right? And but there was a day he was walking past, and and I'd noticed he used to do it. He'd just swing. He'd think nobody's looking at him, and he'd start punching in the air. When he realizes somebody's watching him or somebody can observe him, then he stops. So on this day, he was just walking past me on the corridor, and he just punched out, lashed out, and he hit me, right? And I didn't respond because I already knew he had that reflex thing. It's some kind of impulsive reaction. Unfortunately for him, he hit the black guy, and the black guy's reaction was to the black guy punched him up, man, beat him up bad. It was an older white guy, and this black guy was a black American guy, younger guy, and I was cool, so I didn't expect his reaction. And what is funny is, because the black guy talks to me, right? I was like, so the black guy, I asked him that, didn't he know that guy has this illness? Because the white guy does it. If you observe it, you would have observed him. He tries not to do it when he thinks people are watching him. He does it when he thinks he's alone, unless he's in his zone. Like the day he hit me, he was walking. You could see his mind was somewhere else, and he just punched me. Boom, and he. I didn't react, and fortunately, it was in the open. But I already knew what he had, and it was like he just woke up. It was like in another zone when he punched, and when he woke up, and when he saw me, he looked embarrassed, and I just no big deal. But when he punched this other guy, the black guy, the black guy beat him up, man. Drew blood, punched him. That guy was bloody. Um, it's sad, and so they forced the black guy who wasn't using medication. It was the first time, but I'd been sent to one hospital before. I was the only one who'd never used medication, who'd never been prescribed medication, right? But other people used, even people who were normal, because they start using it in order to get out, right? In order to get out. And this is the criminal thing that's going on in America. And you see Black Americans there telling me that this is the new slavery, right? And it's going on in the South. The venal corrupt pharmaceuticals, they're destroying lives. The corrupt public defender's office and corrupt crooked attorneys, crooked judges like Judge James Bonifant, who's actually, incidentally, he's on the board of MedStar Hospital, some of these hospitals, right? And there's something terrible going on in America right now. So, right on, Judge Lisa Allen, who was, pointing out the harms, the dangers of these antipsychotics. And she was saying she didn't want defendants to use them. She likened them to narcotics. She said, she actually gave an analogy that, it's like somebody saying they're going on a diet and they're getting off potato chips, but then they start ice cream. They replace it with ice cream. That's what these antipsychotics are. Some of these people, they arrested for DUI, and then they get them when you're locked up in jail. Your public defender, they come to you and say, well, if you take some kind of treatment program, then they will lighten your sentence, or they'll release you or put you on probation. So I had a cellmate, a Spanish guy, who was there for DUI, right? And then they asked him to get into a treatment program taking medication. He said no. He insisted. And they'll ask different people. There was a Black American cellmate inmate that I had that was a cellmate, I guess. He was coerced, and his family called the jail, came and said, no, this guy doesn't have a mental illness. A guy 28 years old. They coerced him, and he started taking the medication. I asked him, why was he taking it? Since he had been insisting he didn't have a mental illness, he said he just wanted them to leave him alone. Because they take you, they lock you up, make life miserable for you. And they've tried to do it to me, right? The evil, the corruption, the criminal justice system in America, at least in the South, it's not only racist, with crooked judges, criminal judges like Judge James Bonifant, but they're in the pockets of these pharmaceutical companies. The pharmaceutical companies are using the jails to sell drugs, to peddle drugs. They're actually drug peddlers right now. They're trafficking drugs in through the criminal justice system. There's no evidence that people with a mental illness are more likely to commit crimes than, or people presumed to have a mental illness are more likely to commit crimes than other Americans. There's no evidence of that, right? Human beings are human beings, and they have different emotions, right? Some more visceral than others, right? I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'm a reasonable person, right? And especially for people who were not on medication prior to, they had not been diagnosed prior to the charges, right? So their rights, their protections shouldn't be violated, right? It shouldn't be intruded on just because there are charges. That status regarding their mental health, regarding their medical records, it shouldn't change just because they file charges against someone. So the state of Florida, unlike the state of Maryland, the state of Florida, if a judge, once you've been charged with a crime, you're in a judge's court, once he thinks that you have a mental illness, he can order you to go to a psychiatric hospital to be evaluated and to take treatment. All he has to do is think it. That's not the standard in the state of Maryland. So when I was sent to one of these hospitals for a competency evaluation is just to test three things. You understand your charges, you understand courtroom proceedings, and you can work well with your attorney to provide a defense. That's all that it is. Again, I have a law degree, right? A Juris Doctor degree from one of the better law schools in America, George Washington University Law School. So while you're there, while I was there, of course, I had no choice but to, at least attend the classes, right? Or at least get the materials, the reading materials. So I asked for the reading materials to be able to see. On one of the reading materials, they actually gave us the laws, because they had why is it that you're here? Why did the judge send you here for an evaluation and for, to take these classes, right? And the pamphlet that we were given was actually citing, it was for Florida's laws, that if the judge thinks that a defendant has a mental illness, that they can send the defendant to the hospital. So I had to point it out to the social worker that, look, this is Florida's law, not Maryland's law. And she apologized and said she was going to print another one. So this was a state hospital, committing fraud, using the law of Florida to deceive patients. Like, the judge can just arbitrarily send them because he thinks a defendant has a mental illness, and he can arbitrarily send them to the psychiatric hospital to get an evaluation and take treatment before they proceed to trial, right? The standard in Maryland is different. You can only be committed to a mental hospital in Maryland if after you've been charged with a crime. One of two things has to exist, at least. You either have mental retardation, which prevents you from being able to understand your charges, understand courtroom proceedings, and work with your attorney to provide a defense, or you have a severe mental illness that prevents you from understanding your charges, follow courtroom proceedings, and working with your attorney to provide a defense. One of those two things. So Judge Bonifant arbitrarily tells a lie. I clearly didn't fit the standard of, being mentally retarded, right? Because I have more education than Judge James Bonifant in any event. So he would falsify his the document, his order, lying that this person has a mental illness, when he has no power to do that, because that's defamation. The First Amendment protects us from being accused of being labeled as having a mental illness when we do not, right? So that's a First Amendment protection. So the state of Maryland is violating First Amendment protections, right? Because a judge who doesn't know you just arbitrarily makes himself a psychiatrist and uses judicial fiat and says you have a mental illness. And so you have to go all the way to a hospital, their state hospital, because under the state of Maryland laws, you're allowed for HIPAA protection. You're allowed to see any doctor you want to see, right? That's your right, your constitutional right. But because they file trumped up charges, they reject the principle of being innocent until proven guilty. They reject the Eighth Amendment, which actually prohibits rehabilitation without conviction, right? Because when the judge is sending you to the mental health hospital for treatment, that's like he's imposing rehabilitation on you in violation of the Eighth Amendment, because he's assuming, and the pretext he uses is that he's trying to be fair, that he's protecting your Sixth Amendment rights. But a judge cannot make that determination for you when it's actually violating your other constitutional rights, your rights of autonomy, your right to be self-governing, right? So, and the thing is, they have these doctors that are in cahoots with them, right? The public defender's office. And so they're the ones who actually do it most of the time. So I saw many people who were in the hospital. There was a Black American female who had an MBA. She was well spoken. She was in her 40s. She was accomplished. She worked for the U.S. Treasury Department. The same thing, they had accused her. She said she was falsely accused of a second-degree misdemeanor assault. And she said they locked her up in jail. So they will wear you out. They locked her up in jail for over a year. Where's her family? Well, she was married to a white guy. She had been married to a white guy. And there was another person, and these are some of the challenges some people have, right? Some Black American, because there were two Black American women that were there. Smart, beautiful women. There was this younger Black American woman who had been a model, right? And she got into a domestic situation with her boyfriend, who was an older white guy, old enough to be her dad. She has a child for him, and they got into this whatever, and she's the one who gets locked up, right? And this other person as well, she had a situation, and they accused her second-degree assault. She was locked up for a year, and she never saw a judge. Meanwhile, what they do, right, routinely, the public defender automatically says, well, they think the defendant is incompetent to stand trial. And then the judge orders that, okay, take them to a psychiatric hospital. and they're locked up, and they're just locked up in a psychiatric hospital, and they're forced to take treatment. I was very fortunate that I'm the one who I got out of that situation without having to take treatment, and their own state psychiatrist said, no, this person has no mental illness. If I were to go to my own private psychiatrist, right, they definitely say I don't have any mental illness. I have in fact, my aunt, who's a psychiatrist, had written that I don't have a mental illness. She told the judge before he sent me. I have friends who are leading psychiatrists in America, right? One of them already, he knows everything that's going on. He's a government psychiatrist. He knows everything that's going on, right? So it's unfortunate that there's this terrible situation going on in America right now, and it's a continuation of the invidious attacks on the rights and equality of marginalized communities, especially Black Americans, because they're the main chief clients of the criminal justice system. They're incarcerated in outrageous numbers. And now with the ICE raids, I noticed that it's changing, and now there's the attacks, the pernicious attacks and rounding up of people of Latin American, Hispanic descent, right? Their numbers are now rising in America's jails and prisons, right? And so uh, the decision by Judge Lisa Allen was very, very significant, but she was punished for it, for doing the right thing. And the chief judge, Christopher Sabella, then reassigned her to, a civil, a civil division, because this was it was a criminal case. It was a misdemeanor criminal cases. She was, you know, giving those instructions that the defendants shouldn't take medication, and then the criminal defense attorneys were saying, well, she's stigmatizing mental illness, and that these defendants will become psychotic, they will hallucinate, they will commit crime, all balderdash, right? What's stigmatizing is when the government is violating the zone of privacy rights of Americans under pretext of a charge, right? And then, mislabeling people who are not well as being sick, being mentally ill. Because if for instance, I'm from Nigeria, if somebody suddenly started calling me Turkish when I'm not from Turkey, and I start saying, I'm not Turkish, I'm not Turkish, I'm not Turkish, maybe somebody who's Turkish will start to feel that it's stigmatizing or whatever, I don't know, right? You're not stigmatizing Turkey by saying you're not Turkish, you're not Turkish. You're just stating the truth. You're not from Turkey, right? You're not from Turkey, you're from Nigeria. The same thing with the mental illness situation. So I've been vocal about stating I don't have a mental illness because I don't have a mental illness, right? It's not intended to stigmatize people who have a mental illness, but when being forced, right, being forced to express your status, to deny, to say, look, you can't be mislabeled. It might be misrepresented and misconstrued by people who do have a mental illness as, stigmatizing them, But why should anybody want to fit into a category they don't belong in, right? Why should I want to say I have a mental illness when I don't? Why should I want to say I need medication when I don't? Why aren't my rights respected? So that's, when Americans are being coerced and being mislabeled, they're the ones, it's the mislabeling, it's the coercion that's causing the stigmatization. Because again, I was in law school at a time where I went to a law school where I realized a not insignificant number of my classmates had mental illness and took medication. It doesn't make them criminal. I don't think they're criminals because they have a mental illness or if they decide they don't want to use their medication. Many of my friends, my classmates on Facebook, they spoke openly. This is an era of social media where people overshare. Like there's no TMI. And they probably had their reasons why they shared their mental health status, because maybe they wanted people to understand how they behaved in some certain ways, that maybe it's because of mental illness, or they wanted other people to be aware that, they shouldn't feel that stigma about having a mental illness, that, that look, they're in law school and they do have a mental illness, and other people should feel comfortable about sharing it or whatever. So I noticed that there are people I saw, they would use medication in front of me in class, and I'd ask, and they tell me why they're using the medication. It was a very common thing in law school, right? So, and I don't think these people should be mislabeled as criminals if they decide they don't want to use medication. And this is what's happening now in America, right? This is what, you're making people who are responsible. The lawyers now had this fig leaf. They said, well, they think the judge is probably, she's trying to get the defendants to be, to be more responsible, without acknowledging that, well, actually taking medication and getting their lives on track is responsible. No, it's balderdash, right? This video has gotten long. I'll continue it in a subsequent one. My name is Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.